What we do, we are bringing, as we call it, full stack pickleball experiences, first to Bangalore and then eventually to the rest of India.
The joy of seeing people play at the center is certainly like, it makes it all worth it. To answer your why now, I feel this is the year that pickleball starts to grow really fast in India, and next year I think this is going to blow up.
We feel like when you're in a industry that itself is so new, fast evolving, like pickleball or more broadly recreational sport in India, and there is so much optionality in terms of the paths you could take. Perhaps we haven't even thought of the 10 million question. I think we are looking at it as more of what's our path to 1 million.
Hey folks, today we'll be speaking to Sam and Abhinav, the founders of GoRally, a company setting up pickleball courts all over Bangalore. Through this episode, we're hoping to understand the business of setting up and scaling the infra needed for recreational sports. And since GoRally is under a year old, we're also hoping to give you, the viewer, insight into the mindset of early stage startup founders. So let's get started. Awesome. Sam, Abhinav, thanks a lot for joining us today. To kick things off, why don't either of you tell us a bit more about GoRally, the company?
Awesome. Firstly, thanks, Rohith and Govind, for having us over. I think what you guys are doing is awesome. And yeah, I would say definitely we're one of those slightly more non-traditional businesses in what we're trying to do and a relatively new space. So hopefully we can help out the listeners with a few things. But yeah, we both are co-founders of GoRally. We literally started around 7 months ago, so incorporated the company in February of 24. And I think as you called out, I would say our mission is actually very much about recreational sport in India. The mission is very clear: to get the next 10 million Indians out there playing regularly, and we define regularly as 2 to 3 times a week. But the first sport and the first area or vertical, if you will, that we are focusing on is pickleball. And as Abhinav was saying in our pre-chat, these days it's probably harder to not read about pickleball than to read about pickleball. So in that sense, perhaps we've done well as we have launched this. What we do, we are bringing, as we call it, full stack pickleball experiences, first to Bangalore and then eventually to the rest of India. By that we mean courts, amenities, facilities, technology on top, and of course, perhaps the most important layer, building community via events, tournaments, and connecting really players of all ages and genders that want to play pickleball, which is very much the near-term focus. So in very brief, I think that's what we're trying to do. We've been around for 6-7 months, like I said. We've done definitely Bangalore and Karnataka's largest tournament called Bangalore Open earlier in the year, but also probably India's second or third largest pickleball tournament with around 550 people. We are already onto our second center. So we opened our first center in JP Nagar in Bangalore, and then just opened freshly the last 2 weeks, Indira Nagar, which is 6 courts, indoor, 15,000 square feet, which has got it's got a great reaction. There's a ton of people playing there and a ton of exciting stuff happening, not just on the sports side, but in terms of the events, networking, community side as well. We also run Bangalore's largest pickleball community, around 700 people on that group, and are constantly experimenting, bringing new formats. And I would say have just started, the tech layer part of our journey recently. So in the coming months, you will definitely see quite a few interesting things from us in terms of bringing sport and pickleball to the masses. So yeah, I'll pause there. Abhinav, if there's anything you want to add, please chip in.
Sure. I think you summarized that really well. I feel like to go back to our mission, right? I think when we really looked at what was, we both are big time sports nuts ourselves. Sam plays a lot of cricket, a lot of football. I'm a tennis player myself, but when we deep dived into what was really wrong with the recreational sport market in India, we saw that it was very restricted, right? It wasn't too inclusive. With mostly people within the age group of 20 to 35 playing, and for the lack of a better word, it was mostly a boys' club, right? And I think when we went a little deeper, we realized that it was also something wrong with the existing facilities, the core infra layer itself. And while probably as two people coming from, I guess, a VC background slash working at Bain and Visa, I think a tech solution or a tech only solution was the most attractive one at first. We realized that we needed to do a lot more to actually solve this problem at its core, and hence have gone the route of actually building facilities which are conducive to the kind of audience we want to attract. We want to attract an audience which is not restricted by gender or by age. And in that, we also found the perfect sport, which was the perfect vehicle for us initially to start. And, pickleball, for better context, it's now the world's fastest growing sport. It's played by nearly 1 in 5 Americans already. And it's literally the third biggest activity after running and cycling. And it's a phenomenon because it has been made, almost engineered, to be super easy to begin but tough to master, which is why I think most people who play the sport once get almost addicted to it. And I think we've seen that, we saw that trend, I think, across the globe. Hadn't seen it big time in India, though when we started, I think it had already started picking up in certain states such as Ahmedabad, Bombay, Delhi. But in Bangalore, we saw very little, very few pickleball courts altogether. We were like, why not? Why not? I think Bangalore is a perfect city to start, has such a young tech crowd, people who have exposure to a lot of things that happen in the US, etc. And generally a very active crowd. A lot of badminton is played in Bangalore. It's actually the world, it's the most highest concentration of badminton courts as well. So we're like, let's actually start by bringing pickleball to Bangalore. And in a very short span of time, I've been successful in bringing 2 centers with plans to start 6 more centers till the end of this year. So yeah, that's what we're looking to do. And I think, I feel like compared to what we were doing earlier, we deal with a lot more, let's say, different problems on a day-to-day. But it's the joy of seeing people play at the center is certainly it makes it all worth it.
Awesome. Touched on a lot of things that I wanted to ask you about, which was the why, the mission, the sport of pickleball specifically. But if I can just dig into each of those one by one, right? Can we spend a bit more time on your mission statement, which is India and recreational activities? The problem statements I was able to glean from you was, and being a resident of India as well, is seems like there's a lack of supply in terms of facilities. It's a boys' club, so you're also insinuating that it's not necessarily inclusive for women and then also older people. But how do you think about the problem? Do you think it's primarily a supply constrained problem? Is it also an education and a cultural problem? How do you think?
I think I think it goes to the heart of why we're doing what we're doing, and we both have our stories, right? The short answer to your very last question, I think they're connected. To a degree, it is definitely cultural. Whilst things have changed, parents are still about, sports isn't seen as a kind of a realistic career for most people in India, etc., etc. But that's also driven by the fact that we've never had access to great sporting facilities whilst growing up for the majority of the population, which means you've never been able to develop into really good sports people, making money out of it, building careers in it, or at least playing it at a serious level. So, like myself, I grew up in Jaipur in the kind of late 90s, early 2000s, classic middle class Jaipur. Had the privilege of a really good education. My dad himself taught in universities, became vice chancellor, etc. So very good education, and dad also was someone who is super, super into sport, everything from squash to watching football, etc. And yet, I kind of experienced lack of access to sport because unless you were in the top, 1 or 2 premium schools of Jaipur, which in my case were really far, you had no chance of playing tennis or football or anything like that. Most of those things were pipe dreams because your school ground was just like a bunch of sand. And then even cricket, right, which it's India and it's cricket, for me was just street cricket, right? So I actually never had the chance to play leather ball, with pads and helmets. And you were kind of to a degree scared of the leather ball, right? Which is crazy thinking how, if you think of how cricket crazy our country is. So I think once I went to Delhi for my undergrad at IIT, obviously we had great facilities. I got exposed to that, but also I saw there definitely was a set of people who had grown up perhaps in Delhi, Bombay, who had better facilities, and I could see they had the confidence, to play and to get coaching and to be serious about it. And so, for me, I think that very much early in my career made my mission. Hey, how do I make sure what I had lack of access to, despite otherwise being in a very good, having the best of education and all of that? How do I make sure the everyday Indian doesn't have that? And of course, top down, I think there's a lot of us who've grown up, especially in our generation, the Olympic medals and underperforming across sport. I think the joy of what we've been doing is running into so many people who are like, I mean, literally, there was a guy the other day who came to us and said, "You guys are doing God's work," which is probably hyperbole, but he was like, "I am so happy to play here, right? Like, I've got an opportunity to." So I think that's what I knew I would always want to change. Over the years, obviously, I got into a fun corporate career, everything from consulting to running units at Visa in Europe to then, Series A at Tech at QMath. To do a startup, it would probably be in sport. And what I realized over the years is, I think the last decade, you've seen lots of good, smart people, money, energy go into especially the elite layer in India. So if you look at the leagues, if you look at everyone from Reliance to JSW to Olympic Gold Quest, they're all solving for what I call last mile. Take someone who's already really good, very talented, and help them like win a medal or win the world championship or whatever it is, and then try and use that as the way to attract more people at the grassroots level. Our mission, we said, was, look, that's great, and they're awesome that a lot of people are solving that. Someone needs to also solve for the everyday Indian, right? So not just the 20 to 35-year-old male, as Abhinav said, the 55-year-old, who many of which used to play something but either got injured or are worried about injury or can't find the right cohort. The 35-year-old housewife, who perhaps today everyone's conscious about fitness and nutrition, but if you not everyone wants to go to the gym. Now, if you tell her to start suddenly go play football at the age of 35, that's not going to happen. And even if she wants, she can't probably find 10 other people to do it with. So we're like, how do we solve for those folks? How do we solve for the parents who are ultimately influencing, their children's behaviors and where their children spend time? So, and that was a big part of focus on the recreational layer, and a much more, wider kind of mission in terms of the next 10 million Indians. I would say the other thing, which is noticeable, and I was in London for 9 years, so I was in the UK, moved back only in 2022, was in India and in Bangalore, but I know in Delhi as well, and to a degree Bombay as well. If you want to go out with friends or family, it's like find the next fancy restaurant or find a bar or a brewery. And there is a huge cohort of people who are like, how long can I keep doing that? Surely there has to be something more sustainable. And this is where both of us, having obviously exposure in the UK, etc., had seen what drives regular behavior. Like, why are families spending time at the sports club on a weekend? Why is everyone playing a sport? Because it's a way it's a social avenue, right? You're meeting new people, you're spending time with friends. So the way, whilst we chose pickleball to be a very inclusive sport, the way our spaces are shaped also reflect the other side of the mission, which is make it welcoming for people to chill after, to sit, watch their friends play or watch their family play. So I think those are a few things that, at least for me, growing up, drove the mission. And that's why, to a degree, we perhaps have started with pickleball. Won't necessarily stay, only pickleball. We will keep doing whatever it takes to get a broader set of people to keep playing regularly.
Yeah, and I think from my perspective as well, I think in, having made the move back from the UK, I think one of the things, I had a lot of friends who did something similar, moved back, and one of the things which would immediately strike is that there isn't that much to do back in India. And I think when you dig deeper, you look at like Bangalore, you have umpteen number of restaurants and bars, but not enough healthy activities that you can do together with your friends and family, right? And I think that's one thing that really is missing, which is very common in most countries that people go abroad to, right? In the US, the UK. I think that's part of what is super important into making it a part of the culture, making sports almost that regular thing that you do, not just once in a while or not just competitively, but almost as a regular activity, a social activity. I think the other interesting aspect is that more recently, I think being a tennis player, used to play around with a lot of geeky tools, which I found pretty cool to use. Right, so these were like I take my tripod stand, take my camera, record myself playing. There were apps such as Swing Vision I would use to actually see my serve speeds, see what percentage of shots I'm missing on my backhand. And I'd always be like, dude, this is actually making me so much more motivated to play, because I think it takes what was so naturally provided on a, say, video gaming platform such as, say, a FIFA, and takes what's good about that and brings it to the physical world as well. I think one of the motivations to do and bring something like that to everyday recreational play was also something that made the tech side of our company a part of the vision as well for us.
Yeah, the way we phrase it is, if you run or you cycle, you have Strava or maybe some other running app, and you have 1,000 stats, everything from your heart rate to your circuit speed and your benchmarks. In India, if you play cricket to any decent degree, and I still play every weekend here down on Sarjapur Road, the red ball 30 over games. I used to play club cricket in the UK now. You have Crick Heroes, which has an incredibly loyal following, and I can tell you my stats like a pro. I can tell you my wagon wheels and my record versus left-handers versus right-handers, and both of those, the engagement and motivation that they drive, Strava and Crick Heroes, is incredible. But once you get hooked to it, you can't walk away. What was interesting to us, to Abhinav's point, is you have nothing like that for badminton, for tennis, for football, for pickleball, for paddle. There is no connective tissue. If you think of it right now, Friday, 6:30 p.m., right now there are probably tens of thousands of people in Bangalore playing badminton as we speak.
Right.
And there is no connective tissue between them. If you go ask any of them, how many games have you played in your life? How many games have you won? Or you go ask one of these footballers, how many goals have you scored? They will not have an answer. So that's definitely something that intrigues us and attracts us in terms of how can we get that same motivation engagement to all the other sports.
So I want to ask you. So you talked about pickleball a bit. For the uninitiated, could you just give us a brief description of what pickleball is? And I guess I'm particularly interested in what is the why now around this. Why is pickleball famous now? What problems does it solve for? And then hopefully that answers why you picked that as your first sport.
Sure. So, I mean, in terms of, it's a racket sport, and it's a mixture of three commonly played racket sports: table tennis, badminton, and tennis. It's played on a court the size of a badminton court, badminton doubles court, that is, with a paddle, which is kind of like a larger table tennis racket, but rectangular, and like rectangular shape, but slightly larger. And a wiffle ball, which is basically a plastic ball with perforation on it, basically 40 odd holes in the ball. Well, what's interesting about the sport, and what one of the reasons we're called GoRally, is that our pitch to you is that literally bring anyone to the courts, they'll be rallying within 30 minutes, right? So super easy to start. So what that means is that anyone can play, literally anyone can play. What that doesn't mean is that this is just an easy sport, which you'll soon discover as you play quite frequently. It's pretty tough to move up the ladder. It's actually very tough to master. Well, now the why now behind the sport. So I think I did mention earlier on the call, it is now the world's fastest growing sport. It really picked up around 2019, 2020, especially during the pandemic in the US, when people were looking for a sport they could play, which was non-contact, of course. And obviously in the US, they had tons and tons of tennis courts, but not everyone can play tennis, because being a tennis player myself, I know, like, I think it takes you at least 9 to 12 months to even master a perfect tennis serve, right? But so they had a lot of tennis courts, and yet not a sport to play. So pickleball actually is a sport that originated in the US back in the 1960s, right? And basically, the story behind the sport is that it was invented by four dads who were looking for a sport that they could engage their children playing with. And this basically looked at whatever equipment they had lying around the house. So they had a badminton net, they had a ping pong paddle, and started playing. And now, in fact, has some following across the US and the world from some of the top celebrities in the world. So, you have Bill Gates going out saying that he's a pickler. You have Selena Gomez, who plays in the US. You have multiple other celebrities such as LeBron James, etc., actually invested in pickleball themselves directly, either owning teams or facilities. Well, the model in the US is that you have these massive indoor facilities and these outdoor facilities, which are either tennis courts converted or freshly made pickleball courts themselves. And even despite the number of courts that have come in over the last 2 3 years, there's significant shortage of supply of courts in the US, at least across the US. In India, it's grown over the last 2 years, I would say. So to answer your why now, I feel this is the year that pickleball starts to grow really fast in India. And next year, I think this is going to blow up. It's got about, I would say, between 50 to 60,000 players across India at the moment. Seeded first in states such as Ahmedabad, Bombay, Delhi. Gujarat, Bombay, Delhi. Interestingly, not just a tier one sport, very much a tier one, tier two sport. So played in Rajkot, played in Bhopal, played in Bhubaneswar. Literally, we're on this group, on a WhatsApp group of like engaged pickleball players across India. We see courts coming up in cities we've never visited, right? And that's pretty interesting. That's because I think there is another unit economics aspect to this business, which is also fantastic. So an average capex requirement for a pickleball court is just between 2 to 5 lakhs, right? So per court, obviously the size of the court is really small compared to a tennis court. So 1/4 the size of a tennis court. In terms of amount of investment, probably compared to a badminton court, it's almost like 1/5 or 1/10, depending on the quality of the build, right? And equally very flexible, can be done indoors, can be done outdoors, can be played both ways. So you can literally do this in a terrace, you could do this in obviously a warehouse like we have, in a converted tennis court. You could also, in certain wild cases, do this in a parking lot, right? So I think really great from that perspective. In fact, our thesis is that as this sport flies, this will very much become the sport that is seen in each and every, say, community, like every apartment facility. So that's some of what's happened in India. And I think equally, we've had some celebrities such as all the Bollywood celebrities, etc., have been seen playing pickleball. So you have the glitz and the glamour as well. But soon also, I think what's more important is, I think, it's really good players coming out of India. So now we have some of the top Asian ranked players all being Indian. There's been some really good performances by them. I think still just a start. I think the sport is currently trying to get they're trying to include the sport in the 2032 or 2036 Olympics. There's a couple of federations across India doing some great work as well. So yeah, I think a lot of growth still to be seen, very early days. But yeah, I think the why now for us was more driven by, I would say, what it meant for us and our mission, and the fact that it was also a fantastic business from that perspective.
Yeah. And I'll just add one macro thought. If you think of it, everything in our lives has been completely changed over the last 20 years or so, tech and otherwise. But the sports that we generally have been playing for the last 50, 60, 70, 80 years have remained the same. It's tennis, football, cricket, badminton, right? So it was always, I think there were ripe conditions for disruption of, mass participation in sport. And I think pickleball to a degree captures the need of this generation in terms of you need something that's more inclusive. You need something that is very social and community led. I think that's a very important thing to people, especially now in India, as our again society has become more nuclear and people are moving to new cities. We see a lot of people come and play pickleball as an individual. They want to join these open play games that we do. People have been telling us start pickleball and dating and all sorts of crazy ideas, right? So that there is that social aspect to it that other sports don't have. So I think the fact that it's low entry barrier to play, it's very social in the very way it evolves. And of course, as Abhinav said, from an infrastructure, it's no good if it's too expensive for me to put in the heart of the city, or I can't put it, especially with Bangalore traffic, in every little part of Bangalore. I could make the best, 20 court center in JP Nagar, but if you live in Bellandur, you're not going there, right? You need a center in Dellendur. So it has all those ingredients, which we kind of recognized at the start of the year, and we felt. I actually think in a 5 year period, pickleball has the potential to be the number two or number three after cricket played recreational sport in India. And definitely the pace we've seen in the last 6 months, even though we thought like we timed it well, has I think caught even us by surprise in a pleasant way. So it's definitely on track to do something like that in the future.
Pretty much everyone in my company plays pickleball now. It's like blowing my mind. When the three of us actually met, I was like, okay, pickleball, how big is it really in India? But now all of a sudden, like something changed in the summer almost, where everyone just got really excited about it, or post summer.
It's so true. I mean, it's been crazy. Like I think similarly from our own experiences, right? We used to, I think Feb, March, go out looking for spaces, right? We have to actually. It was an effort telling people about the sport. Now we're flooded. We're flooded with people saying, "Hey, I have a space here. You want to build a court?" So it's been crazy how things have transformed. But to add to your point about everyone at your office playing, I think corporate events. I think it's a great sport for corporate events. I think it's also a great sport for generally team building exercises, offsites. I mean, ultimately, it's a fun sport that everyone can play, right? So I think there is a lot of you're going to see a lot more of it in the near future, and we're probably going to be hosting a lot of those ourselves as well.
Awesome. So I was going to ask you a bit more about. So I have two questions, and you can choose to answer either one, right? And I think there's a lot we can get through here. But my first question was going to be your market opportunity, mission. The why now seems quite clear, but I'm curious about how you guys A, decided to work together, and B, decided to quit your jobs, move countries. Also, it seems I may be wrong there, and make that jump now. That was sort of question number one. Then a very tangential question that was inspired by the last thing you said is, sounds like your business is also supply constrained. So I'm curious about, maybe you could answer that question of like, how did you go from conviction to sort of that first moment of validating this demand? Did you put in your own capital? What exactly happened there?
Yeah, I think in terms of like us getting together and having the conviction to do this. So just for like clarity, I moved back to India in 2022 after 9 years away. I originally went to London for business school, was sponsored by Bain, so did some more time at Bain in the UK. Went to do payments, fintech, helped like build the Giza Europe corporate strategy team, ran cross-border payments for a while. So yeah, completely like unrelated to sport in some ways, whilst in parallel always hunting. I used to have the sports business club there in London and so on. So kind of like more of a hobby and a passion. When I moved to India, it was very much with the mindset of being part of the growth ecosystem. That was the primary driver for me and my wife, who has a kind of similar career trajectory. On a more personal level, we had our 2 year old son, and we kind of wanted him to identify as an Indian. So those are the two reasons we found ourselves in India. And the first thing I did was I actually joined an edtech company called QMath, which is a Series C edtech backed by Google, Sequoia, etc. For a variety of reasons, as chief of staff, and then eventually led P&L as chief business officer. Where I think the most important thing from this discussion's perspective was I ended up working very closely with Abhinav, who had seen QMath as an investor. He's obviously ex VC, ex Lightrock. And then we worked very closely on a bunch of stuff at QMath. He led strategy for a while and so on. And I think whilst we worked at QMath, it was clear to us. I remember our first chat, I was still in the UK. He had seen in the background a book, one of the autobiographies of Alex Ferguson, and we ended up having a chat about football. So I think the sporting connection was clear. The hunger in both of us to figure out if we could ever do something there was clear. And I think things came to a head late last year, where, to your point, looking for the right co-founder, I was very clear I would never do like any startup alone, probably like too big a leap for me. So for me, it was always a matter of like, can I find the right person at the right time? And both of us, I think whilst we connect very well, we, I'm older than this guy, for example. So we bring like different perspectives from different generations. He comes from VC, I come from consulting. I've seen big corporate and so on, right? Like we bring a lot of complementary skills. So high level of comfort, but complementarity in skills. And I think the passion for sport, right? Like literally the two of us were living, breathing, and still live, breathe sport all the time. And I think if you're doing, the reality is, as fast as sport is growing in India, and it will probably go 10 to 15x in the next decade in terms of sporting penetration as India catches up. It is still smaller addressable markets than, say, doing fintech or doing SaaS or doing health tech or whatever else it is. So you need an incredible amount of conviction, perhaps the ability to sacrifice a few other things in the interest of trying to do something which is in your space of passion. And I think once the two of us had that alignment, we were then it was a question of not why, it was a question of what, right? Like how do we solve this? And I think that is your question, to your point on the supply side. Abhinav touched on this a little bit. We started with our mission. We said it's very much recreational sport. We had over the years a good sense of what's broken in India. So even, for example, a great kind of analogy. When I went to play club cricket in the UK, I used to play Middlesex Division Two, Division Three. They have these beautiful, obviously lush green grounds. And my wife would come and sometimes watch those games, or families would come and have a drink, and it's lovely. The facilities are nice and so on. In India, when I play here down on Sarjapur Road, the level of the game is actually very similar or arguably even higher, like the skill set of the cricketers. But my God, I would never even ask my wife to come there because the rest of it is terrible. The loos are either non-existent or terrible, and so on. And I think you see that even in like badminton centers in Bangalore, where it's just like six courts, poorly lit, and that's about it. There's barely any space to sit or walk, and so on. So I think we knew the supply of facilities, not just pickleball, but more broadly sport, was broken, which is why families, A, were not seeing it as a space to socialize, but also there was just limited opportunity for people to go and play. So, we did the 1 month of classic value pools, revenue pools, broke down the industry, spoke to a bunch of people, even went and did some tech MVPs, went to our cricket games, football games, tennis, as Abhinav said, recorded a bunch of stuff, created highlights. And whilst we saw some demand, we realized if you want to grow the pie of people playing, you just have to get into infrastructure and facilities. So that's the first thing we said. All right, let's make the hard choice of getting into infra, probably not as easy to sell to an investor or a VC or whatever down the line. But if you really want to grow the pie, that's what you got to do. Second, we then started to look at what are the other reasons inclusivity in India is low. Because, it is like if you come, if you've been away from 2013 to 22, I think it is very clear when I came back, because I used to run football teams and clubs and leagues before I went off. The number of turfs has multiplied. There's a ton of people playing tennis ball cricket, but all of them are basically 20 to 40-year-old males, right? For the most part. Of course, there are some very passionate women, but generally it's hard to see, or you won't see a lot of them on the ground still. And we said, why is that? And we realized not just the infra, but the intimidation factor of sport or certain sports is high. And there is a set of people who just, kind of like perhaps me, didn't have a chance growing up to play some sports. If you suddenly tell them go play tennis, they feel intimidated. So that's where pickleball was staring at us in the face. We looked deeply into it. We realized it had great social power. We realized, obviously, it was great from a business model perspective because the same funds you could build 5 courts versus 1 badminton court or 1 tennis court. But also there's a bit of business strategy here, which is, as founders, we then took the call, look, we don't want to be yet another badminton or football player. We'd rather do the thing of winning one small right now, but fast growing niche, build our brand name there and then expand outwards. So stay very focused on one ecosystem, build it the right way. And then perhaps in the future, whether it's tech facilities, whatever, expand outwards rather than be just another football, badminton player. And I think this podcast is perhaps a great example. Maybe we wouldn't even be on this podcast with you guys if we were running badminton facilities because there are thousands of them in Bangalore. So I think it's a little bit of the business strategy mixed with the mission, which gave us conviction. So we kicked it off in February. We raised a pre-seed round in March. And before we built facilities, again, what gave us great conviction to really put centers is we actually said, what can we do in an asset-light manner? So we ended up doing this thing called Bangalore Open. We literally rented out a massive, beautiful tennis academy called Topspin in JP Nagar, converted 6 of their courts to 15 pickleball courts. And hey ho, we had like 550 entries and 600 games and 13 sponsors over 3 days. So before we plonked a bunch of money and time and effort into like hard facilities, we had some proof of concept and a lot of learnings around, hey, this our thesis to a degree has something, right? And so I think after that, obviously, then it just became an execution game of build the first few facilities. So yeah, that's a little bit of how we got together and kind of reached pickleball, but the mission was always much broader.
So you mentioned there that you guys have raised a little bit of money. So maybe tell us a bit about that. Who did you raise from? What was that process? Was it easy? How much did you raise? And who did you raise from?
Yeah, I think, look, after incorporating in Feb, I think given the path ahead of us, I guess we had two options. One was to potentially completely bootstrap and plonk a certain amount of capital down for our facilities. But I think we had enough conviction to know that this wasn't just going to be a single center, two center play. Like, I think if you're going this route, it's going to be much larger. So made the conscious decision to raise a pre-seed round. Of course, didn't go out to raise a lot. Ended up raising about, but I think initially went out thinking we'd raise about 3 odd crores, and I think got fantastic response. Both, I think, I guess from a large amount of founder angels as well as US investors, as well as some, I would say, VCs. So I think, amongst founders, we have the founders of Ultra Human who invested in us. It's a large sports and health tech company here. We have Arjun Vaidya. We have founder of Skydo. We have we have a bunch of other founders as well. I think before I forget a few, our lead investor is Sujit Kumar, who's literally the founder of Udan and was part of was leading operations at Flipkart. So a bunch of founder angels. Then in America, basically, people had seen pickleball growing already. So I think a lot of investors wanted to see that same model here in India. We got a couple of those. We, in fact, even got an investor who's running he runs the distribution for one of the largest equipment players in pickleball, Eula, invested in us. Then we also brought in one VC, but this is Bharat Founders Fund. But I think they operate very different to a typical VC in the sense that they're run by multiple founders themselves. And I think we co-invest with certain founders of investing. So for Harsha, for example, is one of our own investors and is a partner at Bharat Founders Fund as well. So look, I think for us, in terms of the raise, we were pretty confident we didn't want to go do a typical VC raise at this stage of the business till we've at least reached a certain stage where we know exactly the model that we'd be scaling, especially because there is one side of the business which is fairly operational, and there is another side to this business which is the tech side of the business, which absolutely can scale really quickly. But I think till we found our ground, until we made sure that we were, say, profitable on one and potentially had found product market fit on the other side of the business, we didn't want to go and raise a large VC round. And that was part of the thinking from the outset with this round itself. So went out to raise 3 crores, ended up getting fantastic response and doubled. So ended up raising about 6.5 crores.
Yeah. And I'll add, given, I think, Rohit, what you'd said at the start, in terms of part of this podcast is to help other folks thinking about starting up, etc. I think self-awareness is so key with these things. So, for example, when we got together, we felt we had an incredibly complementary set of skills. One thing we perhaps didn't have, which is critical for the business as it is right now, is real estate experience, right? So neither of us are real estate guys. So, okay, all right, we got to work really hard on that. We, in fact, got a real estate advisor. But equally, the fundraise side of things, because of our past networks, he's a VC guy, worked at 2-3 different VCs. We worked at a startup, IIT, Bain, etc. We said, okay, this is something where we can over-index versus your, let's say, average founder, because we have network, we have access, etc. So let's play that card when we want to play that card, right? And so literally when we raised our funds, we literally had the company. It was the two of us on calls with a 6-slide deck, which we worked really hard on and made sure it was like sharp, short. And yeah, to a degree, I think it's about storytelling, narrative. At that point, there was no facility, there was no tournament. Much fewer people had learned about or heard about pickleball. So I think we really, we put method to the madness, which I would highly recommend. Like literally, our first day was in this very room. Came up with a whiteboard, figured out what our investor classification would be, created a list of 150 over the next 2 days, and just went, ballistic with calls upon calls, just playing the numbers game. And we were lucky that very soon in the first week itself, we got, two, three really helpful. And again, that's the incredible part about being in Bangalore in the here and now. Folks like Sujit, I remember Abhishek Goel from Traction, who's also on the cap table, Deepak Singh were like straight away in one call. And, once they're in, they help you with so much more. So I think there was a good lesson in there for us saying, let's think what are our strengths, what are our weaknesses. Let's double down in terms of covering up on our weaknesses. But where we also have strengths, let's play them hard and not raise 3 crore. Let's raise 6 crore because we can. Right? There are other areas where we will probably be at a disadvantage. So that kind of was the approach we took.
Right. No, makes sense. And that's actually really helpful. Have you spoken to your investors more candidly of what their outcome or what they're really looking to see from their investment in you guys in GoRally, right? Because a one call close, that's awesome, right? Yeah, I'm curious to know if you could share a little more about what you think that they're really looking for from you guys here.
Yeah, it's a very good and perhaps difficult question to answer because all of them are different in that sense, a little bit different at least. But I think the common ground, and then I'll maybe talk about what's happened since, right? Because that's really the acid test of the relationship. But I think the common ground we were looking for was really long-term patient folks who weren't, who'd been around the bush and weren't necessarily just looking for the next big outcome in like a 3 to 4 year period. Some passion for sport, right? Because that always helps. And a really nice bonus would be someone who's actively seen the journey of offline businesses, not just tech businesses, because it is a very different formula. Often, and it often takes longer and so on. So interestingly, a lot of investors would turn their tables on us and they'd be like, hey, look, I love it. I love your background. We think it's a good team. But will you guys do this for as long as you will need to do this? Because, in 2-3 years when you're still like going and you see, people around you doing other stuff, will you stay the course, right? So I think we were very much looking for investors like that. Of course, I think they want returns, but they understand that the life cycle perhaps is slightly different here to your regular tech business or what I think has been super popular in the last 5 to 10 years. I think a good example of that is, one of our main investors, 2-3 months in. So now it's Feb and in March, April, we've done the tournament and, May, we knew our first facility was going to come in, but pickleball had started to heat up, right? It had absolutely started to heat up. And Abhinav and I, because we were still cracking the real estate equation and it took us a while to do that. So we went for, one of our chats and it was a very candid chat. And I kind of asked this guy, I said, hey, do you think we're being too slow? Like everyone around us now seems to be starting pickleball. We're like just starting our first center. Do we need to go faster? And so this guy just like sits back in his chair and gives, I think, very sage advice. And he basically says, yaar, tum logon ko jaldi hai kya? Right? Which is basically like, are you guys in a hurry? And we're like, no, I mean, we're in this for the long term. He's like, then I always tell all my founders, like, what's the hurry? Do your first 2-3 centers, deeply understand the customer, get the PMF equivalent, whatever it is that is for your center or your tech side of the business. And he said, trust me, if you then 2 years later, as the institutional player in sport or pickleball, enter a new city or enter a new area of Bangalore where there's already an existing facility, if you have understood the customer well, they will still flock to you, right? So that I think was one of the most meaningful like meetings for me because it like for us it was a little bit like okay, yeah, whilst things are going quickly, you still got more time than you think, and more important than speed in certain businesses, of course, in certain businesses, speed and land grabs do matter, is getting the experience, the product, the repeatability, the scalability right. And we weren't telling that to our investor was telling that to us, which is, I think, the right way for it to happen. So yeah, I mean, those are a few examples of what we were looking for, but we still have a long road ahead of us, and we'll see like how I think different people have different perspectives. There have also been investors who have told us, because this is I think the interesting thing about doing something like pickleball or sport is everyone can touch and feel it. It's a relatively straightforward business. Everyone has a view. People are like, start e-commerce or go hard on content, own the content space, or own more facilities, go outside of Bangalore. Everyone has a view. So we've definitely heard some of the other views as well. Unlike, let's say, if you're doing a SaaS business where ultimately the more technical it is, the less feedback you're going to get from your everyday kind of circle. So it's interesting to see how it'll play out. But I think generally we feel very happy about the mix and the type of investors we've been able to get till this point.
Got it. Got it. Have you thought about what your first 10 million in revenue is going to look like? Is it going to be primarily through setting up more cohorts and generating demand for those cohorts, or do you see product expansion over there? Curious to know how you're thinking about things. I want to say in the not too distant future, right? Let's say over a 3-year horizon.
Yeah, I think, very early days still for us. I would say, there's almost like 3 forks in the road that come, let's say, somewhere 12 months down the line. So very early to say, I think, but we do know the 3 rough paths that do exist. And it could be some sort of combination of these. So one is, of course, expanding the business that we will scale across Bangalore this year, the centers business, to more cities. Now, whether that's primarily just pickleball or pickleball plus, say, another sport, we don't know. We don't know that yet. But that's the offline business, so to speak. And I think the end game there would be, can we own 100 centers across India? Right. That's the kind of end game there. The other is, I think, a fairly lucrative and large market which exists, which is the equipments market in sport. I think when you look at India's largest sporting company, it's Decathlon. And I think there is a huge space over there to build a company, whether it's a marketplace or a D2C brand of its own within equipment in sport. That's definitely another route that is open once we build a certain brand credibility. The third route is, I guess, the toughest, but once cracked, potentially, like you could say, provides us both a moat and the ability to scale this business outside the country the fastest, which is, can we actually crack what we call Strava for racket sports, right? So if we can crack that, which probably, as we both know, right? Finding PMF in a tech startup is never an easy nut to crack. But if we can crack that, that's potentially we see a white space that we haven't seen filled anywhere across the globe yet. So there is going to be one big company that's going to be built that cracks that, and yeah, that's going to make a lot of money.
And I think the question itself is interesting because, and Abhinav, correct me if I'm like wrong. Like we use a sporting analogy. I mean, we're in sport. We feel like when you're in a industry that itself is so new, fast evolving, like pickleball or more broadly recreational sport in India, and there is so much optionality in terms of the paths you could take. Perhaps we haven't even thought of the 10 million question. I think we are looking at it as more of what's our path to 1 million. And the analogy I would give is if you're setting up for a test match versus say a smaller T20 game, a test match is a 5-day thing. There's going to be like massive ups and downs and rain and all sorts of things will happen. So whilst you want to win the test match and you kind of maybe have a path or a vision, on day 1 morning, you're like, how do I get to the lunch session? What do I want to be if I'm batting till lunch? Maybe 100 for 1 is a good space to be, right? And so I think that's the path we're taking because we are playing a test match. Like there's so much that could happen. We could be an equipment company, we could be a Strava, we could be a center business. So I think we're saying where do we want to be early next year, and we definitely have a path to that 1 million, 8 CR number, which I think we are doing well on. And then based on what we learn from there, we plan for the next session and so on. So maybe that's like more honestly, I think that's like we probably don't have a path for 10 million just yet.
And I think one of the things that also will drive this decision towards the end of next year would definitely be like what the consumer says. And I think one of the advantages of being an offline business is you're very close to consumer. So we literally like get consumer feedback every day at our center. So nothing better than that, I feel. So we will try to continue to stay true to that. And I think hopefully if we continue to do that, I think we'll find some problems that are big enough to solve.
Makes sense. I found that sequence of questions fun, by the way. You were just telling us how your investors aren't in a hurry. You were telling us that you were taking your time and making this submission, and then Rohit was like, "How are you going to get to $10 million? We are the we are the aggressive investors.
You're the investors in the room."
But okay, so if I may shift gears a little bit, right? You mentioned there that real estate experience is something that you don't have. I'm curious about. Given that, what was the operational aspect of you, say, setting up your court in Indiranagar and then beyond, perhaps? What were the operational challenges? Did you sign leases? How did you get the space to reflect the ethos that you wanted to in the first place? Were there other alternatives? What are the economics? Anything you can tell us would be nice there.
Yeah. See, I think first thing, again, like I said, recognizing a potential space where neither of us were experts. First, we did a lot of like just speaking around. So spoke to a lot of the founders of other, relatively successful offline businesses on, everything from like who do you work with to what is the kind of rules of the game here, who's a good broker, etc., who's worked with like growing companies at scale. Are there specialist brokers who do this and so on? I already mentioned getting a real estate advisor on board who actually turns out he's not just real estate, he's real estate in sports. So himself has built sports facilities, which was really important because there's stuff like, to your point, licenses and how do you manage all of those in a local area and so on. So I guess as a VC ex-consultant, like you just naturally, when you see something you don't understand, you go to like just dig deep, speak to lots of people, lots of data points. Second is get partners. So we reached out to multiple like agencies, brokers, and through trial and error and success and failure, figured out who actually understood our ethos, but also our business model. Because there's a lot of people who can show you great spaces in Bangalore. But if it's 150, 200 rupees a square feet, it's not going to work for me, right? So I'm just wasting my time. So people who understood that you had to be out of the box here, you can't just, box standard go show me like spaces in malls and high-end retail spaces. Once we understood who those 2-3 people we'll kind of like double down with them. Third was, I kid you not, post that tournament, I felt there was maybe 6 weeks or 8 weeks. We were literally just driving around in our cars. And I've been in Bangalore now for 2 years, but I kid you not, I can tell you, my Bannerghatta from my Horomavu, from my Hennur, I can probably drive there without Google Maps now. I've done so much driving, seen so many sites. And like any other thing we do in our respective spaces, it's a numbers game. I think we must have seen 300-400 sites over those 2-month period. And now when we go to a site, we have this like instinct. We're like, okay, what are the numbers? We have a sense of like, what can you build here? How fast will it happen? What's the catchment? And so on. So I think that period of you just have to go through it. I think if it's important to your business, if it's real estate, in this case, you just have to go around town and build a little bit of that expertise under your belt. Eventually, what we figured out, to answer your question on our specific business, we figured out, look, we're still an early stage startup. So, and we wanted to create a network of centers, and we didn't want to raise too much too soon, didn't want to dilute, etc. We raised a nice pre-seed round. So we realized, okay, the way to do this is try and find asset-light models for most of our centers. And then perhaps 1 or 2 centers, Indiranagar being one of them, and there will be one more coming in Agara and Koramangala, which will be even bigger, where we invest maybe a little bit more from a capex perspective because they are our flagships. right? And we want to accrue everything. So we then started to get really creative with the asset light model. So our first center, JP Nagar, is actually a tennis court conversion. We literally painted kitchen, the pickleball and kitchen and lines and stuff like that on the courts. They had the rest of it. It's a beautiful center. We had already worked with them on the tournament. We made it look really professional. So we have like, if you go there, you will see like sporting sideboards, and there's like everything from the small things like where's the water dispenser to the viewing area to the seating area. It's all taken care of. So very asset light, but gave us a lot of good credibility. Indira Nagar is the complete opposite. So we walk into this warehouse through a connection. It is actually right behind. It's actually the old customs building for the old airport. So for HAL Old Airport, it's the customs building that eventually was given to Amazon Prime. So Amazon Prime was before there, before us. We walk in there. It's this massive 15,000 square feet space, and like one thing we keep laughing about is when you like get into the real estate game, you need vision because the place was a mess. There were broken autos outside, there was garbage, there was pigeons living inside, and there was like bird crap all over. And if we had seen that 2 months ago, we'd be like, no way, man, like can't even picture this. But we'd seen so many examples like, oh yeah, look, these dimensions are perfect for pickleball, and this area is perfect for amenities. So we executed that at incredible pace. And we got creative with the deal making. I won't go into the details here, but for example, if you do a massive real estate deal, one of the big things that hurts you from a cash flow perspective is the deposit, right? Because it's typically 6 to 10 months, and if you're a startup that's raised money, 10 months of rent on day zero is like, that's a huge sum. So we got creative with how we structured that with the landlord and so on. And we said, okay, let's plonk our second center here in 40 days end to end. We got the thing done because what we knew it would do, and 2 weeks in, it's kind of playing out. It gave us the ability to own the ecosystem in Bangalore because now the who's who is coming there. It's centrally located. It's not like on the outskirts. It's indoor. It looks and feels different to anything you ever seen in sport in Bangalore. Otherwise, it's colorful. It's got amenities. It's got waiting areas. It's got a cafe. The work. So it really sets our benchmark for what people are expecting. But if you look at the next six centers that are coming up, only one more of them is going to be this capex heavy. The others are all asset light. So in one case, a school, the classic model, school is building the courts for us. They will obviously use it for their students till 3 p.m. From 4 to 10, we can use it in the weekdays, and we have it for all the weekends. And of course, we have Karnataka's best player as our first coach. So we can provide the school access to some really good coaches, etc. So it's a very symbiotic relationship. Equally, there are landlords with lots of land in Bangalore who want to like be associated with sport in some form. So we started to find a lot of those. So they will have the land, they would build the warehouse or the courts or whatever, and we will operate it for them, right? So the capex is theirs. We come in with the expertise, with the tech, etc., to operate it, and we do a revenue share. So if you look at it, our strategy actually has become out of the eight, six are partnerships in some way or form. They're asset light, and only maybe one or two are where we spend larger amounts of money. And I think that will evolve. I think as we look beyond Bangalore, what is our model? Is it partnership? Is it franchising to a degree? Do we still keep one big owned flagship center in all of the major cities? I think those are the questions we need to answer. But yeah, that's definitely like the kind of strategy behind it. The economics are very much like any other, I would say, sporting or kind of uh, service business. It's all driven by utilization. Can you fill out all your, obviously, your weekend slots, your weekday evening slots, but you really start to get in the money when you're doing weekday mornings and even more, in the afternoons, which we're starting to see in Indranagar. Because again, Bangalore has a crowd of, people who work late night hours and have time earlier in the day. Obviously, we talked about housewives and things like that. The other thing, as Abhinav mentioned, is events, right? So your rental will always reflect, give or take. You might get a good deal here or there. So the trick is, can you host events where your per hour take for those courts is much higher than usual, which means you're like almost making back your rent through the events, and then everything else is profit. So I think those are the things we're working on. We've got to a great start. As you said, Rohit, at the start, Indranagar is running full, but we still have afternoon times, which are right now fallow. So figuring out like creative ideas on how to get people there. And then also now that we've done quite a few of these events, almost making it more programmatic. So if you guys were to come and say, hey, I want to do a team event with 25 people versus I want to do a networking event with 100 people versus I actually want to learn pickleball as a clinic, what does each of those events look like? Make it programmatic, put a GTM against it, and get the team to scale it. I think that's what we'll do next.
Got it. Cool. No, thanks a lot for getting the details there, Sam. Makes a lot of sense. It's so interesting that there's so many micro innovations that you guys are actually really leading into as you're building this business. I think that's really important for entrepreneurs to realize, where there's this big idea, but there's all these small ideas that you need to execute really well in. And in a lot of ways, that becomes your moat as well over time. Um, One of the other places that I wanted to dig into was regarding your partnership with Hudle. Uh, Specifically, you can only book GoRally courts on Hudle, not on Playo, not anywhere else. I'm curious to know what's going on there. Why did you choose to have that exclusive?
No, I think, for us, most decisions boil down to one thing, and Sam will smile when I say this, but simplicity, I think. There are facilities out there in Bangalore that are on multiple applications, but we knew pickleball was a new sport, so a lot of the demand gen wouldn't really rely on pre-existing sort of demand. It was going to be all net new people. For us, we just basically assess the solutions out there. Obviously we have the option still of building an application of our own, but given speed and our first two centers were opening fairly quickly, we just went out to pick what we thought was the best customer experience out there of the apps that we saw. And Hudle had some experience with pickleball both in Delhi and in Bombay. They've actually got a lot of the pickleball facilities in both of those cities. And as a result, were looking to grow in Bangalore, found great partners in us in helping them grow as us being like one of the most premier facilities out there. So that's how it's been working so far. And I think like that's all it boils down to. So most of these applications don't really speak to each other. So when you're on say multiple apps such as both Playo, Hudle, Kilomore, there's a lack of interoperability, which becomes an operational hassle, a hassle that we thought we could avoid.
Yeah, and like there is definitely like an undertone of two things I would say, and like this is perhaps what we're bringing from our past lives, not your regular traditional sports operator. We're prioritizing the long term over the short term. In the short term, I put it on multiple platforms. I will get more demand. I will have people net new coming from Playo and Hudle and whatnot. But long run, my game isn't to, we're not opening just two centers, which I can manage in the back end. As Abhinav said, if we were a center business, we need to open 100. And if hundreds of them are like on different platforms, it's a mess in the back. So we're solving for simplicity, scalability. I think the other thing we've noticed is, and this is also interesting for like, I think an interesting choice for early stage founders. We again don't know what's the right answer, but we have ended up working with a lot more partners who want to grow themselves. So Hudle is big in Delhi, Playo is big in Bangalore. We've ended up working with Hudle who are themselves like trying to grow really fast in Bangalore. And I think that gets you special privileges that you perhaps won't with the incumbent. It's the same thing with our cafe partner. They're also an early stage company, Chemco Life, doing health food. And in fact, our coffee bar isn't going to be one of the big name like coffee players who we could have got in Indranagar. It's someone who does a coffee, he's a coffeepreneur, has some interesting coffee products of his own. But the ability with him to innovate and literally, like, for example, come up with drinks that are the same as the color of our coats, right? It gets us like special privileges and a working relationship that perhaps with a big name coffee player, they just be like, hey, this is it. Like, this is my product set, take it or leave it. So you're also seeing a little bit of that. not necessarily always the right, I guess, strategy, but we've generally seen till now it's worked in our favor. And we perhaps will, even on the equipment side with Pickleball, we're working with a lot of Indian brands, not just the US brands. So we really find a lot of joy in seeing some of those brands do well.
Okay, one, just looking through our list, one last question, and then we'll get to a rapid fire because I know we're over. But I wanted to end asking you so there's a lot of optimism early stage. You're talking to a couple of, shall we say, I don't know, jaded is the right word, but entrepreneurs who've had dreams and then things are so. So I guess the question for you is, what's keeping you up at night about your business, right? There's the optimistic future, but there's also that, I guess you've got to be wary about the pitfalls. So what's keeping you up right now?
I would say there's two things. I think one is finding a solid moat, finding and building a solid moat in the business. I think, I know you mentioned a couple of things, right? It's about the small things you do over a period of time, how you think through the customer experience, how you're seen as a institutional player rather than just a player just putting up courts in multiple cities. Right? Thinking through problems more deeply. That's on the offline side, but can we also potentially find a larger moat, on the tech side that actually makes it supremely difficult for any other competitor to compete with us? Like, can it be something that has strong network effects? That's one thing we're really thinking deeply about. I would say the other interesting aspect keeping us up at night is just bracing ourselves for building what could be an extremely operational business. So I think, knowing that this means that often there are going to be events on weekends, and often as founders, we're going to be expected to be there, right, through the journey of, through the life cycle of this business. I think thinking hard about how we will sort of solve for that, say in 6 months' time, in 12 months' time, 2 years, so on and so forth. Those are all problems, interesting problems to solve that definitely keep us up at night at this point in time.
Got it.
Yeah, 100% agree. 100% agree.
That makes sense. Now, I was going to say, as an aside, one conversation that Rohith and I keep having is about mission and sort of how irrationally you feel about a business, because there's a lot of founders who are economically driven by the market opportunity, but I feel like at least I don't know if we'll have this in the recording, but I feel like some of the resolve sort of wilts when you're forced to do things that aren't natural to you, right? Maybe you aren't brought up doing an operational business and you're like sitting in front of a laptop, and then the money is at stake, but at some point it's really hard to be mercenary about things you don't enjoy doing day to day. So I'd be curious, like maybe having you guys on in a couple of years to see if, hey, I'm doing all of this operational work and it's in service of this mission that I really like, but was it the day to day that I've gotten used to because it's in service of the mission, or does the day-to-day sort of eat up the
No, I think the benefit of having a co-founder who you have a good working relationship and communication with is that we actually talk about these things even today. So not 2 years down the line. I think these are very active conversations we have, because I think these aren't things you can avoid, right? And it's better you from an outset at least understand what is coming and understand what the implication of each decision you're making is, right? And I think there's been multiple folks already in this road, but we will be making many decisions going forward, which may change that path for us. But let's see.
And I think we try and be realistic about that, but also the ethos with not just the two of us. Because by the way, this is true for anyone who joins our company. There will be weekend events, and there will be customers calling you, and there will be rain in an outdoor center and all of that stuff. So it's interesting, when we hire our venue managers, for example, the typical founder hire conversation is founders painting a glorious vision, and how the company is going to go 100x, and it's the best thing to do since sliced cheese, etc. Which to a degree we do, I won't lie, of course. But a lot of people will come to us and be like, I want to work in sport, I want to work in pickleball, I want to manage this venue. And I say, great. And then I walk around with them in the center and say, look, there's a lot of sexy stuff. It's going to be on Instagram, it's pickleball, it's cool, it's sport. But for these people to be happy, there is a lot of unsexy hard work behind the scenes. You're going to have to turn up to the center earlier, 1 hour early, 5 in the morning. You're going to have to make sure it's clean. In fact, if I see a piece of garbage, I'm going to pick it up and put it in the in the bin. And if that is what you're saying, so then I kind of like tell them, look, this is the behind the curtain of the role. Now go sleep on it. Wake up tomorrow morning. If you're still interested in this, then let's have a fuller interview, right? Like that is literally what, because there's no point getting people who then are later like, oh, I have to like, figure out all these customers are calling me, etc. You just either are able to do it or not able to do it. And the passion for sport helps, but you have to brace yourself. So I don't think it's a question just for the two of us. It's actually for anyone who comes and joins GoRally, and we're trying to make sure we get that culture in.
Awesome. Well said. All right, so we're going to end with a quick, with a rapid fire. The idea is just if you can keep the answers to 20-ish seconds. It's also nice because it helps us create shorts, which are a little bit more marketable. So either one of you or both of you, whatever works, please go for it. I have about 5 questions.
So do we get like a coffee hamper at the end of this?
Absolutely. We'll meet you on the Indranagar courts at Saturday 6 a.m. If you're not there, you lose your hamper. All right. So question number 1. If you could go back a year and give your starting self one piece of advice, what would it be?
Oh, interesting one. I think I have an answer. I think I would say probably give yourself that initial period of time where you're really thinking hard both about the problem. I think the initial period, we spent about 3 months, was super useful for us, and perhaps not always relevant, but potentially even sometimes try bootstrapping the business, testing out a few ideas initially without immediately going and setting out stalls saying this is what I'm going to do, because that the first idea that you always have that isn't ever necessarily the one that you're always going to scale.
Yeah, I would just add, I would just say, if you are thinking of spending X months on the 0 to 1, for example, running your first center, make that 2X, because you will always need more time and you will learn more things as you go along than you think you will. So even now, I think whilst we have a roadmap of 8, we are constantly like evaluating them and saying, does this still fit? We just learned this in Indranagar and JP Nagar. So yeah, double the time you want to do your 0 to 1 for.
Makes sense. All right. What's one thing you've learned to appreciate about each other over the last year that was unanticipated?
Oh, I have this one nailed down. Obviously, I had done my thinking about why we would be a good team. But one thing I've discovered since, which has been a pleasant surprise, is this dude is just like a garden of Zen compared to me. He is, because what happens when you're in an operational business in real estate and you have to sometimes deal with labor, and he has a joke, he sometimes says you've gone into Virat Kohli mode, which also you sometimes need. But he just, like, the patience and the calmness with which he will continue to discuss with certain people, I look at that and I'm like, how is he doing that? And I think over time I'm starting to learn from it. So I'm glad he's there to balance it out, but there's also a lot I can learn.
I think it goes both ways. So I mean complementarity is super in this business, because I think attention to detail and I would say structure and the operational rigor, a lot of it I think is credits to Sam in this business. So I think when we think of any sort of piece within this, whether it's say the work plan for setting up a center from within 40 days to potentially setting up our coaching, right? Each of these have been well thought through and structured thanks to Sam, and run like a well-oiled machine thanks to him. So those are 2 things that definitely he brings to the business, which I don't think I bring as well.
Awesome. All right. What's one book, podcast, social media channel, documentary, or just generally stream of content would you recommend every entrepreneur consume, and why?
So I would say, very specific to our business, and I actually kind of forget the name of the book, so I will maybe send it to you later to add on. But one thing we've thought about a lot is the network effect. And so I think reading about how businesses from Uber to various other Silicon Valley firms to businesses in India have built that, and for example, how it's not one big network, it's a bunch of micro networks, has been really interesting. So it's by my bedside, it's half read, but the half already has been very rewarding. I've lost that reading in the last month, which is why I've forgotten the name, but I'll get back to you.
Yeah, I feel like, when we were in that phase where we were deciding what to do, there was a lot of reading going on, a lot of which has stopped right now. But I think we both read a book which I will recommend now. I think it is The Hard Thing About Hard Things. Super important to read before you actually start up, in my opinion, because I think everyone sees the glory, but it's important to sort of see the dirty side behind what actually is seen as pure success, right? So I think knowing what you're getting into when you're doing entrepreneurship, I do think even if you read all the books in the world, you're probably still like going to be surprised when you actually start out. You're going to discover something about yourself. I think, to me, I almost look at entrepreneurship as like a quick fire MBA today, right? I mean, I think it's like the best kind of MBA potentially. Like, so whatever time you're investing in entrepreneurship, I think you're going to learn so much about yourself in such a short span of time. I feel like that's the best content. But if I were to choose a piece of content, The Hard Thing About Hard Things.
Awesome. And Sam, to clarify, did you say the network effect, or did you mean the cold start problem? Was that the one?
I think that's the
Cold
one.
start
Yeah.
problem. Man.
I was gonna, and I know this is screw your rapid fire, but I think more than like content, two Abhinav will smile because two like recent, let's call them pearls of wisdom. One given by my old boss at QMax, the CEO, and one from our investor, which like I just remind myself maybe once in every few days really helps. One is said in Hindi for effect, jaldi kya hai, right? What's the hurry, right? Is like just a really calming effect. And the other one from the old boss is if you have 6 hours to chop a tree, sharpen the axe for 5 hours, right? Which goes back to the whole planning, operational rigor piece. So whenever because we're in such a B2C business, that people throw like really interesting stuff like, yeah, let's go start this, or let's start coaching, or let's start this. And then we're like, no, hang on, let's think about this properly, plan it out, and then go for it. So I think those are two things we really followed over the last few months.
Awesome. All right, just a couple more. If you could have anyone as a mentor, any entrepreneur or otherwise, who would it be and why?
Wow. Very interesting one. Huh? I mean, given the problems we're dealing with, I know he's not seen always in positive light, but Mark Zuckerberg actually, who better for actually cracking, I would say, the network effect problem. But yeah, that's probably one. But I don't know what he'd be like as a mentor. So I've never actually thought of him directly. But I do think like he's cracked a lot of those problems. So that's the one that came to mind.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, not necessarily specifically to this company. I think one person I have always like looked up to, despite all his like other personality challenges, I guess, Steve Jobs for me, because goes back to that incredible focus on customer experience. You heard a lot of things: customer experience, simplicity, and a lot of rigor before you put the thing out there. So I think that's what we try and embody. It has to also be simple. Ultimately, it has to be a very like easy to absorb product or service or whatever.
Awesome. All right, and last one as a bonus. Pickleball aside, what are your favorite sports to play, watch, and why?
So I watch a lot of football and tennis. I think I'm also massively into fantasy Premier League. So I've been playing it for about 15 years. Used to run a podcast as well. So big nut over there. But play a lot of tennis, I would say. I think been getting a lot of shit from my fellow tennis players because I'm obviously playing a lot more pickleball than tennis of late. But yeah, that's the sport I play the most. I used to play a lot more football and cricket back in childhood, but tennis has become my sport now.
Yeah, for me, depending on the week, either football or cricket, I think they just keep switching. Play both, watch both. Have probably watched every Rajasthan Royal game in the IPL, and obviously every India game over the years. And on the other side, every Man United game and every major World Cup, Euros, etc. If I had to pick one, perhaps right now it's cricket, just because I get so much joy from going on the weekends, switching off from everything. Literally, I put my phone in a bag, and 6 hours later, I emerge and I take the phone out. And in the interlude 6 hours, I have basically played a cricket game. I'm in the batting, in the bowling, in the fielding. I'm sledging people. There's all sorts of stuff happening. So it's just the best switch off activity for me.
Awesome. Okay, bonus question. Since you both had football, what are each of your predictions on which year India qualifies for the Football World Cup for the first time? And how does this, and I guess this ties into your mission statement as well, right? If you succeed, get there faster.
I'm gonna say, my dream is little bit selfishly for it to still happen in a period in which I can go and enjoy that World Cup wherever it is. So maybe like 20 years from now, which is 4 or 5 World Cups from now. Now that might sound like a lot, but having seen a lot of sport and also companies and so on, I think it'll take us two things. One, to build the base of talent and opportunity, which is still happening. But I think in 8, 10 years, you will see that fully reach its potential in India, as in there'll be enough grounds and leagues and teams and so on. But after that, you will still need a period of mentality and culture change where we become a winning culture. We think it's our right or expectation to qualify rather than some miracle to qualify. And so I think we will have to suffer through a period of perhaps another couple of World Cups before we cross that line. So I'm going to say, I'm going to say 2042.
Uh, can I give both head and heart? I think head here is head probably says like it's going to take way too long, so probably not in my lifetime. But heart says maybe like something similar to Sam, probably towards 2036, 2040 would be great. But yeah, I just find, I feel like, it's an extremely competitive sport. Also, one that doesn't necessarily play to our strengths. I feel like racket sports that way, at least like a lot of these sports such as badminton, table tennis, even pickleball, they play to our strength to some degree. But I feel like football, yeah, that's my answer.
Hey, Abhinav, very smart plug for pickleball at the end. Love it.
Awesome, guys. Yeah, that's all we have. By the way, as a Liverpool fan, I was going to stop myself short from asking you, does India qualify for the World Cup first, or does United win a Premier League next? But I think that kind of rant indicates that it's Friday night, and I think that's all we have with this podcast for now. But that was awesome. That was a lot of fun. Thank you so much. Rohit, and I don't know if Rohit's here. He's on and off. But when we discuss I think we can stop recording after this. But when we discuss what kind of episodes we like, it's when someone like inherently when the people we're speaking to go back to the mission. And I love that, like a big chunk of it you guys are talking about. Look, it's the sport we like, and this is the goal, and everything else stems from that. So I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
No, likewise. I think superb execution, because you guys had like a lot of questions planned, which I think got us thinking pretty deeply. And I think you got a lot out of us, which as an interviewer, you've done your jobs really well. So yeah, and really enjoyed it. Would love to see what the output looks like, and hopefully we get a lot of shots we can share.
Yeah, no, thanks, guys. Super interesting questions, and not all the usual ones. So I think that's always fun. Let's let us know how we can help even from beyond here.
Yeah, I hope to see you guys. Yeah.
So there you have it, folks. That was our interview with Sam and Abhinav from GoRally. Super interesting business. Usually we do a debrief right after we speak to the guests. Unfortunately, we couldn't do that last time, so we're doing it a few days later. Yeah, hope you guys like it. To kick things off, Govind, what were your big takeaways from our conversation we had?
I've been reflecting on which of our conversations through Weekend Entrepreneurs I've been having the most fun with. I think the most fun aspect of any conversation is the story that people tell with regards to why they're doing something. And I think just like a lot of our, you may have, this may be a trend that I keep bringing up over and over again. But even here, even though this is an early stage startup, right, where a lot of things are still to be figured out, the founders seem to have a very strong sense of why they're doing this. A lot of their answers went back to personal experiences. For example, I used to live in London where there were community-driven sports, and in India, I don't necessarily have that. There was a childhood story in there of how things were growing up, and there is this sort of vision for how they'd like the future to be. So, in general, that's what stood out to me the most. And just if I may add one more point there, for early stage startups, I think that's all you have to go with, which is there's no real numbers you can work with. I don't think we discussed too much beyond a couple of early validation in terms of a few centers being set up. So I can see how a story like this is powerful enough to attract investors to the mix. So yeah, overall, a very exciting conversation from just the story perspective.
Got it. Yeah, I guess one of my biggest takeaways from this conversation was just how self-aware Sam and Abhinav were. For example, they knew that while they worked in startups before, they knew they didn't have a real estate background. So they ended up getting a real estate advisor on board to actually advise them on where to set up the centers, the right way to structure these deals, and so on. That was quite interesting. The other piece which also called out to this was with regards to when we asked Sam, hey, why didn't you actually end up putting up GoRally codes on both Hudle as well as Playo? He was just like, it's just going to be an operational nightmare to manage the inventory if it's on two different platforms. So we're just going to pick one and we're going to optimize on that for right now. So really a lot of self-awareness, which I personally believe is one of the most important traits for any successful entrepreneur. So that was one of the things that I really took away there.
Got it. So I can ask you a question on that. Through your journey, this may be at the early stage or even all the way through until now, what sort of consultants have you chosen to engage through the course of your startups that you found to be really good investments, right? Obviously, there's folks you can hire and that becomes a full-time task. But here they spoke about engaging a real estate advisor, which was a critical skill that may not be required in-house. So do you have any stories to share in terms of consultants, contractors, good decisions you made?
Yeah. So we've leveraged a whole slew of consultants and advisors during the SpotDraft journey. One of the earliest consultants that I remember us engaging with was this company in the US called Jellyfish that helped us figure out our outbound GTM motion. That was quite interesting. To be very honest, we didn't actually end up closing any deals through them, but what we really learned through them was how to actually build out an outbound demand gen function and what's the sales process we need to follow to actually close the deal. That's what we learned from them. Another person that comes to mind is David Falame, who was a fractional VP of marketing at SpotDraft for almost a year, I want to say. Learned a ton from him. I personally learned a ton from him. And I feel like our entire marketing function itself leveled up as a process of that. More recently, even for our Series B fundraise, we have engaged with investment bankers to actually help us with navigating the entire deal and bring it to a close. So I personally feel like no one person is going to be able to do everything. And it's important to find the right people for the right job, even if they're not full-time with you, to get your business to the right outcome.
Got it. Yeah, if I may distill a framework then, so I'm just taking this in a different direction, but if I may distill a framework for when you want to hire someone, right? I think it's perhaps when it's just taking all these anecdotes together. It seems like you should hire a contractor if the person may be too expensive. You don't have enough work to give that person full time. So in this case, GoRally doesn't have enough sort of centers to have a full-time real estate advisor. It could be when you perhaps can't maybe afford or maybe the role itself isn't quite ready. I don't know at what stage you hired your VP of marketing, but since you're going towards your Series B right now, having a VP for certain functions too early on may be too sort of specific. So I imagine there's a way in which you, would it be fair to say that you hired that VP of marketing to introduce a skill before you needed that full-time in-house? Or was it more to up-level your existing sort of folks?
I think it's more the latter more than anything else. I feel like we needed to review marketing a long time ago, but it was important to get the right person on board. And sometimes the best talent for your business, they don't necessarily want to end up joining full time. So getting them on board as a consultant is the next best thing over there.
That makes sense. And I was going to add a third point, which is something that my co-founder in my first company did really well. Whenever we had folks who weren't convinced about the company, but were sort of interested in what we generally had to do, right? We all have side interests and we all want to dabble in different things. He was super open to having people work 2-3 hours in the weekends or in their spare time to earn a little bit of money. And then that work would make them so interested that they'd want to join in-house. So having that consultant almost be the sort of trial period before you you jump in and tie the knot together was another great way in which we found consultants to and that's been another interesting use case for having consultants. But we're getting off track. Sorry, we should get back to GoRally.
Anything else stood out to you, Govind, from our conversation? There are a few other things for me, but I'm curious to have you offer your thoughts first.
Yeah, I mean, the business is an open book. I mean, there's a lot to be figured out. So I find it interesting to think about if I were in the driver's seat, what are the things I'd be concerned about? What are the decisions I would make differently? If I may sort of throw the metaphorical pickleball back into your quote, what do you think about defensibility for businesses like this, right? For the business as it stands, as opposed to what GoRally wants to build tomorrow, seems like community is a big aspect of it, which is people come, get sort of oriented with, get sort of engaged, not with pickleball, the sport, where, the courts become something that you can switch from one day to the next and the game remains the same, but rather build a community around the people who come to that specific court, or build a sort of mind space where your spouse and your child come together and feel like, hey, this is home. Do you think that would be defensible in the long run, or do you think there are other factors that would keep this business profitable?
See, I think Sam and Abhinav were both pretty transparent about where they wanted to take the business and how they imagined it would grow over the years. And if you just look at it as like setting up pickleball courts, there isn't as much defensibility to it. You really do need to build that community around it, because then people are joining the GoRally community and then they're going to be going to GoRally courts and so on and so forth. So I really think that's what, if you look at the pickleball business as itself or the pickleball court business as itself, building that community is going to be super important. Really being this premium brand for pickleball and other racket sports is important. And they're doing all the right things there. So just to throw something out there, a bunch of people from my office play pickleball. And now that they've discovered GoRally, they only go to the GoRally courts because the courts are just so much better, right? So they're taking that premium route for pickleball itself. They're getting like the best pickleball players as coaches as well for players.
Right.
All of those things actually end up making a big difference in the end consumer experience, and that will end up going a long way. And then another thing to keep in mind is they are a very profitable business, like each single court. And I did some math, which I'll actually walk you guys through as well. You can say that there isn't as much defensible in the business right now, but if they're able to even just scale up these courts, that itself becomes a moat in itself. The revenue that you're generating becomes a moat in itself, because you'll be able to use that to end up setting up new pickleball courts, be able to negotiate better rates across the entire value chain of what they need to set up and maintain these courts. So they're very uniquely positioned in a lot of ways. I don't want to call them the first movers, but they are early movers in this space. And the sport itself is growing very, very aggressively across the globe. I see that trend continuing even in India as well. So yeah, I'm quite bullish overall, and they themselves are not calling themselves Pickleball Rally. They're saying GoRally, right? So right. They know that they may need to end up pivoting into other sports and so on. So yeah.
Okay, so you said you've done some back off the napkin math. Would love to see what you put together.
Yeah, sure. Let me actually just share my screen real quick. Yeah, cool. Can you see my screen here?
Yep.
Okay, so quickly walking through what these colors mean. Yellow is essentially a variable. You can end up changing it. Blue is essentially something that you're very, very unlikely to change. It's almost like a law of physics. Green is essentially a calculated value over here. Sam mentioned that the total capex for setting up a court ranges from anywhere from 2.5 lakhs to 5 lakhs. I'm just taking it as 5 lakhs at the top here. The number of booking slots per day is 34. How I'm coming to that number is, if you look at the Hudle website and you look at pickleball, for the pickleball courts for GoRally, you'll see that, hey, their slots open at 6 a.m. and the last slot is at 10:30 p.m. and they're half-an-hour slots each, right? And most of their slots for all 6 of their courts are booked out. Now, jumping back into the sheet, so 34 number of slots, cost per booking is 400 rupees. So max revenue per court is essentially 13,600 rupees a day. I'm going to assume a booking efficiency of 60%, which may be a little low for them. But so based on that, there'll be approximately 20 slots that are booked per day. And then the actual revenue is going to be around 8,000 rupees a day. That's what they're saying. Now, what are the costs that GoRally has as a business? There is the OPEX cost of paying whoever it is that's managing these courts. That's one fee. Someone who's coming to clean, etc., etc. That may be another fee. Rent is probably another cost. But the other big fee that is baked into the business is going to be paying the booking platforms like Hudle and so on something. I've currently assumed it as 0%, but we can end up changing it very easily. Let's actually make 20% here. So GoRally is essentially generating around 6,400 rupees per quote, assuming that they're giving 20% up to the booking platform. And based on that, the total revenue per month is around 1,92,000. Oh, yeah, 1,92,000. And revenue per year is around 23 lakhs per year, right? And based on all of this, the time taken to return the capex is around 78 days, right? Now, they also have 6 courts just in their Indiranagar location. So that roughly translates to 1 crore 38,000 in revenue that they're actually generating, including paying off the booking fees, right? So the real cost in this business almost is going to be how they negotiated the rent with the landowner. That's the real cost in the business. And that's really what's going to make or break how quickly they end up growing. And Sam didn't end up sharing too much about this, but my guess is that they probably did strike up some kind of a revenue share agreement itself with the landowner where they're like, hey, we're not going to be giving you this much in a deposit or anything like that, but we'll give you X% of every quote that's booked. That's what I would do, right? Really keep my upfront deposits and things like that as low as possible, just to make sure that I end up generating more cash flow. So yeah, overall, quite a healthy business, like each of these locations, if you think about it. Can they end up setting up, each of them generating over at least this one location is generating over 1 crore. Is there a market for 100 such locations in India? Definitely. Is there a market for 1,000? I don't know, right? But this definitely can be a very high revenue generating business. And we're not even talking about other tangential things that they can end up building in addition to this, right? Where people can end up buying their rackets and their pickleball and so on and so forth directly from them. They can organize tournaments and there's a fee to actually end up participating in those tournaments. There are all those different kinds of things that they can actually end up doing here. And right now it's very much brand building. And what I love about it is they're profitable and making money. So yeah.
Nice. Great math there. Just adding on to your math, 23 lakhs per year is about 27,500 US dollars. So
yeah,
just working backwards from the $100 million revenue mark, assuming 6 courts, then you need to, assuming 6 courts, you need to basically set up 650 such courts across India to hit that $100 million mark. And of course, all of this is notwithstanding any considerations around like profit and
yeah, interesting. So yeah, I think you're probably right. Your math might be right. 1 crore. Yeah, you need to create like 6,000 such codes, if I'm not mistaken. Or was it 600?
650 such codes.
650 such codes. Yeah. Is there a market for that? I don't know. Perhaps. That's what I would say there.
Perhaps. If you were in their position, and this is easy to say, would you have raised venture capital for this, or would you be very cautious about raising more venture capital? Because if you have a framework that can be somewhat profitable and then you can churn it in, my first instinct is, why not? Except for the capital costs, are there alternative ways of financing the growth? Is there a way to like push the capital back in? And then you can just have a very profitable business without the pressures of what I just did, which is how do you make $100 million? You've got to maximize the value from every single customer, and that can often push a business to do things that aren't necessarily sustainable.
Yeah. So raising capital itself is not necessarily a bad thing. It's a tool that's needed to grow the business. And they were pretty smart about who they raise money from. And they didn't really raise money from these venture capital firms that raised a $2 billion fund. And the entire math works out in such a way that they want each of their different companies to aim for that $2+ billion exit, because that's the only way they'll end up returning their fund. they raised money from founders. They raised money from, I think there was one fund over there. So if I were them, I would definitely end up raising, and if I was doing this business, I would definitely end up raising one round of capital and really try to figure out a way to use the profits from the business to set up the second center, third center, fourth center, fifth center, et cetera, et cetera. That's what I would do. Not really give up too much equity. Yeah, that's just me, I guess. What about you, Govind?
No, I hear what you're saying. Firstly, I'm processing all of this because building such a business is not, until we started Weekend Entrepreneurs, wasn't even the kind of business I was thinking about. But I see what you're saying there. I'm increasingly, like you, of the mind that that there's power in SMBs. There's power in building profitably rather than invest, go deep into that sort of R&D, customer acquisition hole, and then realize your profits and revenue later on. So having that mindset early on makes a lot of sense. Actually, on that, one of the things I'm quite technically inclined, but I would probably TBD. But there was a lot of seems like they're also putting an effort to figure out alternative revenue streams, like investing in globally minded SaaS applications for things like Pickleball and so on and so forth, which would require a lot of, shall we say, R&D effort, hardware procurement, have them move away from their DNA. So as you're saying all of this, my instinct was to find some of that cool, but mathematically or in terms of the framework that we just laid out of reinvesting profits and keeping your financial footprint,
it's going to be difficult.
Sustainable is going to be difficult. So should be fun to see how they navigate that sort of desire to grow from like a product innovation perspective versus multiplying the business model.
Yeah, time will tell. Let me ask you one other question, Govind, and then we can wrap it up. Knowing everything you know about this business, would you invest in it?
There are two reasons why people invest. Most of my investments so far have been from, and I'm an angel investor here, right? Most of my investments have been in the category of this would be a fun journey for me to be on the ride with. And to some extent, it's almost, I wouldn't even say social status. It's like a conversational thing. I think a lot of investors derive pride from saying, hey, I invested in this company, you should go check it out. So from that perspective, this is definitely a story I want to be associated with. If I were, of course, the investor, I'd want a closer look at the math. Assuming that the math is what you've laid it out to be, I'd maybe do a better. I'd want to visit some of these codes, which I think you have. I'd wanted to get a better sense of who the competition is. I'd want to see what the arc. I'd go and talk to people who've been in the arc of building other sports facilities out in India, whether it be squash courts, tennis courts, and see a lot of that. So right now, I'm in the long story short, I'm in the category of interested in learning more. Would love to be there just for the story, but from a pure financial perspective, I'd need to know a little bit more before I make a very prudent decision.
Yeah, no, that's a fair answer. On my end, what I would really love to do is to almost invest in a court with them. I don't necessarily want to end up running the business or running this thing, but I'm like, hey, can I actually put in money right now for this new court that you're actually setting up and give me a share of the revenue indefinitely? That's what I would really like to do over here. Investing in GoRally, the business, like more power to Sam and Abhinav over there. I don't really think they need me over there. So that's how I think about it as well. And I'm all about like generating more passive source of income right now. So
that's a lovely idea.
Framework I have. So
that's a lovely idea. As an investor, I would love to fund a franchise because then I have a clearer sense of. I'd actually move it from my pool of like moonshot bets into more of my pool of like lower risk, lower reward, but more predictable revenue sort of pool. So again, Sam and Abhinav, if you're still listening to this, maybe that's if you have that proposition, sign us up first. So there's a little bit of money we might want to put in there.
Cool, guys. So that's it for this episode of Weekend Entrepreneurs. If you enjoyed what you heard, please do like and subscribe. And we'll catch you guys later.